What's up, guys? We'll get rolling, Kris. Thanks for coming on. We're really excited to have you. Being a mental performance coach for the Tampa Bay Rays, I'm sure you've seen a lot and you kind of dealt with a lot too. So today, you kind of came up with the topic mind and body connection. I know we're all excited to hear about it. If you have any trouble sharing your screen for anything, just let me know. I'll just make you the host. And if you want to maybe introduce yourself better than I can, feel free to do so as well.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks, Ryan. I'm happy to be here as well. Regardless of everything that's going on, I really appreciate you for putting something like this on for us to continue to grow during this time. So that's pretty cool. Just going, I know everyone's probably on mute now. Just by like thumbs up, can everyone see my screen? All right, sweet. So I am a mental performance coach with the Tampa Bay Rays. Hopefully we get to play a season this year. I'll be working with our two short season teams in the New York Penn League. Our team is in Hudson Valley. And then our advanced rookie team in the Appalachian League, they're in Princeton, West Virginia. And so I guess a little bit about me, my background. I grew up in Minnesota, just a suburb outside of Minneapolis, St. Paul. I was fortunate enough to go to the University of Iowa, play 4 years there. Made some, of course, as anyone that went to college, you made some really good friends and some great memories on the field and of course off the field. And so then I was really fortunate. I got drafted in 2015 by the Miami Marlins. Played 2 seasons with them, and then 2 seasons of independent ball. And obviously, during that time, it is a lot to do with go Cyclones, Boo Hawks. Appreciate that. Thanks for saying that. I love that. It gets me going. But anytime that you're within baseball, we all know, but baseball or softball, it is a game of failure. And I certainly learned firsthand how important the mind is to my performance and everyone's performance and whatever we're doing, not just competing on the field. And so today, when I talked to Ryan, I wanted to talk about the mind-body connection, and that like our thoughts lead our actions. And so I always think about the importance of raising awareness before we can make any changes. If in the world of any type of psychology, we're always dealing with behavior change. And so if we want to figure out, if we want to be consistent, our thoughts have to be consistent. And if we want to make a change, our thoughts have to change. And so I want us to first start off by understanding like our feelings and our mind. And to make a point here is that what I do, our coaches compete more and think less by looking at things in a different light or a different perspective, as well as gaining awareness about ourselves. And so with that being said, I'm not a sports psychologist. And so the things that are not going to be clinically based. And it sounds like Ryan, the bonus episode is going to be more of the like the generalized anxiety or kind of the clinical side of psychology, which is of course extremely important to our mental health. So just looking at everything that I'm going to talk about through the lens of just performance psychology. And it's really important to me that said, because when we deal with feelings in the manner of our performance, it is they're valid, but sometimes they can trick us. And so the first thing I thought about when it comes to understanding our feelings is that they're not always permanent. Like we have to know that. So we're not always sad. We're not always mad, and we're not always feeling joyful. Like they come and they go. And when we can realize that we don't have to hold on to certain feelings and emotions, and they don't have to control us. Secondly, is that they can be open. And I said that to look at it through the lens of performance, and especially that it's not that they're not rated at all. It's that sometimes we put too much weight on them. And if we're an athlete and we're going out and we feel like we have to feel good to play well. Well, obviously the players that we're playing 140 games, and over 140 games, we're not always going to feel good. And so if we're banking on feeling good to play well, we're just really not going to go up there with a lot of confidence. And we all know that confidence is probably one of the big characteristics when it comes to playing our best or best. Okay. And so that brings us into understanding the mind. And again, the thoughts that we have really dictate our actions. And so they say that about 60,000 or 80,000 on average thoughts that we have per day. And out of those thoughts, about 95% of them are repetitive. And even so, like 80% are generally negative, which is extremely important to her, because if 95% are repetitive, like how many of our thoughts are negative over and over and over again? And if our mind dictates our actions, which it does, negative aspect is really going to take a toll on us. Right? So we have to, again, understand these things so that we can raise awareness and make changes if we need to. And lastly, again, like the mind tells our body what to do. Now, with baseball and softball players or any athletes who have been playing for a long time, sometimes we forget this because we've been doing it for so long, we just react. But there is a time and there's a process that our mind tells our body what to do. And so we want it to be on our side rather than against us. And so when we start to realize that connection between our mind and our body, we can start sustaining things to help us. And so one big piece of everything I do, kind of a low-hanging fruit, has to do with our language, and particularly our body language, because we're communicating through this at all times. And now I can't see everyone in the chat, but I see people, and some body language gives off a kind of a view of like leaning in, and that can maybe dictate that we're trying to take in information, we're listening. But coaches are, I would say, are really, really good at this, in that of course they don't read minds, but they read body language, right? We walk out to make a pitching change and we might ask a question, but what they say might not be that important. It's probably how they say it, and then what they're standing like out there, or maybe we can see it in their eyes. So really, we communicate, like 93% of our communication is nonverbal. It doesn't even what we say, it's how we say it, and then how we carry ourselves. And so when we start to understand this, we can then start to dictate how we want to go about our business, and particularly when it comes to confidence. I want us to think back to those feelings. If we have to feel good to play confidently, maybe we're basing this stuff on not such concrete information. So if we take ourselves to the mound or to the plate or to the field, and we start to think about, can our opponent pick up on our body language? And the answer is yes. Now, not everyone is as good at it as other people, but there's this really great study that takes tennis players, and one tennis player is watching films and of two groups, and one group displays big body language. So you can think of like their head is up, their chest is out, and they also are making a lot of eye contact. Now, the other group is smaller body language. So maybe the shoulders are rolled in, like heads down, and they're not looking at the camera or the person as much, their opponent. And so what the athlete had to do that was watching this afterwards, they had to rank their confidence level of beating and competing against the people that they watched. And I'm sure you could guess it, that the ones that they saw when they were displaying big body language, they displayed lower confidence to compete and beat them, rather than the opposing people who displayed lower body language and less eye contact. So like we're reading other people's body language. And I love that study because I think of the matchup between the pitcher and the hitter, right? The batter's coming to the plate and they look at the pitcher. What is their body language saying? Or what is the hitter's body language saying when he's about to go up there and face 95 plus? Is he scared, or does his body language show that he's ready to go? So these things like play into our confidence. And I always think, again, going back to when we realize this, now that awareness starts to kind of flip a switch and we can start making these changes. And so I love the idea of like building our confidence into something that's concrete. And so really, like, again, our feelings, they come and they go. So our actions are something that can be sustained. And so when we start to relate our confidence to how we act, that's something concrete. That's something that we can continually do. I think about our preparation, whether it's us as coaches or players. What are you doing so that when you go onto the field, that you can be confident, or we that go into it? And so when how we act, I first think that it is like our attention. What are we focusing on? Because if our attention is on, maybe it's the results, or maybe it is what the pitcher is doing in essence, which can be obviously great information, but if it's taking away from maybe the simplicity of like seeing the ball or just like throwing our pitch with conviction, we have to have attention to those specific aspects of the task that allow us to just trust our abilities that we have at that moment. And secondly, it goes back to like carrying ourselves with big body language. Not only does it affect our opponent and what their confidence levels are, but it has internal benefits for us when it comes to how our physiology and our psychology are aligned. And I can go into that a little bit more, but just being time sensitive, I'm going to keep on going. And so then lastly, as we talked about, that like our mind and our thoughts dictate our actions, right? So we have to talk productively to ourselves. And this is really, again, like a conversation all in itself of what is productive self-talk. But if we are to, I love thinking about like high schoolers when they're walking around high school. If you're just kind of watching body language and just seeing how kids interact, if you were to pick the kid who's walking down the hall and a lot of maybe swag, we might say, like, are there thoughts like, oh man, like I'm not very good, I'm not ready to go today, what is everyone thinking? They're probably not thinking that at all, because it would then be translated through their body language. So our thoughts are going to align with what we end up doing with our body. So we have to, one, attention to the task, and a lot of times the simplest form, because when we think about the game speeding up on us, then we're probably not focused on the little details that really add up for us to be as good as we can. And then two, carrying ourselves with big body language, and that of course is aligned with talking productively. And is one, to relate confidence to actions, not just feelings. Now, the feelings are important, and we're probably going to get those feelings when we act like it more, and vice versa. The more we feel it, yes, we're going to act it, but we want to have it concrete. We want it to direct it in something that we get to control, and we get to control our actions. And then those our actions and our thoughts are linked together, of course, and going off of the attention to the task, carrying ourselves with big body language, and talking productively, as those will go hand in hand. So I definitely, if we have time, Ryan, if there's any questions that anyone has based off of this, of what I said, or if you have other questions, the mental game is really growing, which is cool. But I think that happens when there's more resources, because we all know that the mental game has been important for sports and, of course, baseball, softball for a long time. So that's my Twitter as well, and then my email that you can ask me any question that you have.
Kris, that was awesome. Thank you so much for your time. If you guys do have, a couple quick questions before we move on, just unmute yourself just so there's just a little bit faster, although I got one from Ty here. What do you mean by confidence should be rooted to something concrete?
That's a good question, Ty. So when I say concrete, I mean things that we get to control. So when I talk about the actions that we want to have, like those are things we get to like fully control. You get to control your preparation. You get to control what you are focused on. You get to control how you decide to think. So those things are concrete rather than just kind of hoping that we wake up and we're confident. I see that as being like it can get blown over in the wind of adversity, if you will. Good question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think, Ty, we kind of talk a little bit about, our mental process, and Rob Seifert talks about having a reset. Like, did you go through your process and your reset? Like, that's something you can control, on that side of things. So, like, that would be like concrete. Kris, correct me if I'm wrong on that.
No, 100%. Yes, routines are great, and our own developed process in a way. Just maybe a different way to say it is that's concrete. You can go to that and having a release to get rid of maybe a distraction or an error so that you can compete at your best for that next pitch.
Yeah, I think one thing that you touched on that we haven't really talked about yet was having big body language. I mean, if you add that to your process, like if you try to look like a bad dude in the batter's box, you try to look like a big bad dude in the mound, like, and that's like part of it. Like did you do that? Or, and what we say, and I stole this from Ben Broussard, is are you wolf or you rabbit? Which mindset are you in on that side of things? So I think that's something concrete that you can control when we talk about giving away at bats, giving away pitches, things of that nature. So Jordan's got a really good question. Do you know of any studies of specific music genre to help produce proper mental growth?
I don't know of any specific studies or studies on specific music, but one thing that like music comes up for our players as well, and that like we'll try to put it with a highlight video for them to so they can watch and they can constantly see their success and build off of that. Now, like we end up asking those players, like, what music do you like? What music gets you going? And fortunately, but also sometimes unfortunately, in the world of psychology, it can depend because we're all different. All of our our mental state is just different. Mine is going to be different than someone else's, and so maybe I like classical music. So I think maybe the specific music might be difficult to pinpoint, but I think it would be an interesting study. I'm definitely going to look now. So thank you.
I think, and this is totally anecdotal, like for me to perform, if the music matches like my mood, then like I get into more of like a focused state. And if that makes sense, like as soon as the music, and this is 100% anecdotal, like I'm just thinking like when I'm driving too, and I'm like just brainstorming ideas in my head, if I'm trying to brainstorm like cool, calm, collected, like maybe Vitamin String Quartet, for example, is like basically like all this popular music that's all like no words, and it's like all done by like string instruments and stuff. And then versus like Eminem or whatever you're listening to, if I'm like hyped up and amped up, I feel like if the music matches my mood, that's when I can be focused versus like fighting that. But that's 100% anecdotal, Jordan. That's just off the top of my head. I'd be curious to know what you come up with, Kris, when you look into that.
Yeah.
On that side of things, because that's maybe another one of those things where like your feelings don't necessarily match your mood, right? Like on that side of things. Like if I don't feel like I want to be amped up, but I need to be, then that's different. Favorite books or podcasts on mind-body connection or the mental game? Cannot use Mind Gym, although it's a good quick read.
Yes, I've read that book. Really, really good. My favorite books, they probably aren't like specifically to mind-body connection, but yes, mental game, which I think is will encompass it for sure. Let's see, Heads Up Baseball by Ken Ravizza, go-to for me. Then pretty much anything Harvey Dorfman, like The Mental Keys to Hitting, is really, really good. And that's a pretty quick read. And then the ABCs of the mental game of ABCs for pitchers. That's also by Dorfman. I really like that one. And the reason why with those is they're simple in a way. Like, I think sometimes we run into the mental game has to be this extravagant thought, and it's really not that. That I think goes back to what I said in the beginning of helping athletes think less so they can compete more. Now that goes into maybe thinking at different times, because the mental game lives in those moments, like from pitch to pitch or inning to inning. And so those might be the times to think. It's all about timing, which is cool because that's baseball.
Awesome. Well, just to be respectful of everybody else's time, Kris, that was unbelievable. Thank you for that. If you're willing to send me that PowerPoint, I'd love to, because we're recording this, I'd love to just kind of pair it with that. I think it's just some good quick resources. They don't want to dive into the whole thing. If not, totally get it. That's fine too. So thanks for your time, man. I really, really appreciate you coming on, and we'll kind of move into Austin Wasserman's topic, which is going to be arm care and kind of throwing and things like that. And Austin, we've heard some from a variety of different people, on this topic. We've heard from professional pitchers. We've heard from Mike Ryan on the AT medical side. So really curious and really excited to kind of get your take on what people can be doing right now to kind of help themselves out.
Sure.
And what you're prescribing your remote athletes even. Obviously, I know you do a pretty comprehensive assessment, but what are some kind of generalisms that people can be doing or people can be worried about? And then also maybe correlate this not just for pitchers, but just throwers in general. I know you've got the book High Level Throwing. We've got a lot of position players on here. We've talked about the importance of position player throwing and things like that as well. So kind of turn it over to you. If you want to introduce yourself a little bit more better than I can, that'd be great.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ryan. Thank you for having me on, Kris. It's really good as well. So I appreciate that. I'm just going to share my screen right now. I have a little PowerPoint that I want to kind of go through here. Let's see. And kind of what I want to do for this, next 15 or 20 minutes is I really want to talk about, positional throwing, but, more about patterning and some things that you guys can do at home, on your own with this crazy time. So we're going to talk about, applied training for throwing athletes, arm health, some patterning work, and just kind of dive through it. And hopefully you can take something out of it. So just kind of a quick background on myself that, for those that don't know who I am, my name is Austin Wasserman. I'm the founder of High Level Throwing and Wasserman Strength. It's kind of a nationally recognized program and the author of the High Level Throwing book series for baseball and softball. I grew up in New Hampshire. I played Division I baseball at University of New Orleans and then transferred to play at University of Connecticut. Then played some pro ball for a little bit, just delaying life and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. So ended up getting a job in New York City, worked at a PT clinic as a strength coach and assistant PT, and institutional patterning. And it was just a really, kind of take back to baseball and softball athletes. So I'm in Deerfield Beach, Florida, with my facility. Obviously it's shut down, but still working with our remote guys and softball players. So what is high level throwing? They're really about principal movement patterns throughout the throwing delivery based on the ever-changing external environment and situation. So, everyone hears about high level throwing, and is this kind of a made-up concept? Is this a style? Like, what is he teaching? It's really about movements through positions, not necessarily like static throwing or getting to a certain position. I think in the past, throwing has been so complex, and we focus it on, pitching only. We've kind of neglected overall throwing patterns for positions. So, high level throwing is not a style. It's basically a framework, a concept every athlete's going to be completely different, different size femurs, tibias, like different torso length, arm length, everything's completely different. So we want to understand that high level throwing is more of a framework and not just like a style that we're trying to teach. And we have to focus kind of on what matters. Sometimes when we're working with players, whether it's a pitcher or position player, there's so many things that need adjustments, and we just have to narrow it down and figure out what is the factor and non-factor for each individual thrower to help with their training plan. So, a lot of attack on social media, and you see these ridiculous people talking about, this 14-year-old athlete's arm action and, his lead leg and his sequence. And you have to realize that there's a lot of things moving in different directions, and throwing is really complex. So, we have to kind of pick one thing, kind of figure out what that might look like, how we can change it if we need to, and then blend in the rest of the components as needed. So what is arm health? To me, arm health is the overall approach to strengthening the joints involved in throwing. And
awesome. Really quick, I don't mean to cut you off. Are you trying to share your PowerPoint right now?
Yeah, it's not.
It looks like you shared your Zoom screen, your Zoom window, maybe.
Let me see.
There's a way to switch that up.
Let me see here.
Unless you guys can see the PowerPoint, and unless it's just me, you guys, I'm getting a black.
Is everyone not seeing that or no?
Maybe try stop sharing, and then there should be like tabs when you click share.
Let's see here.
Because at the top it says zoom.us.
Yeah, it says new share. You guys seeing my screen right now or no?
Now we see you. There we go.
See it?
Yep, all good, man. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I didn't want you to keep going and get to the end and stuff like that.
No, I mean, you're good. Let me, can everyone see this now?
Yeah, we're good, man. Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, no doubt. Okay, so back to kind of what I view arm health. The overall approach to strength points involved in throwing and preparing the tissue for the demands of an aggressive rotational movement over and over again. I also view arm health as like cuff, scap stability, strength and timing, as well as, of course, overall hip strength, upper body, and I think single leg strength is super important. The ability to sequence the body properly. I think we sometimes neglect that aspect of it. So we don't actually talk about arm pathway or how we sync the arm with the stride, or what type of shape or angle we're trying to work through as a position player. So I think pattern component is super critical to add into your standard cuff work and SCAP work, and then your overall strength training program. So a lot of things that we see with our athletes from an assessment standpoint, and this is across the board. Obviously, there's some outliers that come into an assessment with some really good values, but we're seeing a lack of upper body and shoulder and elbow strength. We see poor humeral head shifting and timing. So we see this a lot with younger athletes as the arm kind of moves into and through external rotation. There's just a lot of shifting going on in the joint, and that comes down to poor shoulder strength as well. But the ability to time the arm as it moves through external rotation until the forearm starts to unravel is something that we're seeing is off a lot with both populations. So sequencing issues, whether you can start with a medicine ball throw or a PVC pipe rotation movement, but athletes have to learn to dissociate and rotate efficiently with pelvis and trunk kind of separation and disconnect. So we're seeing some issues with that. We're seeing lack of single leg strength and some stability. So kids that can't do a lunge or body weight lunge, and then not being able to load that lunge effectively. So we're seeing some inefficiencies. And again, these are all things that can be worked on. And the last one we're seeing is kind of a lack of scapular control. So as the arm moves through the throwing zone or loads back, how does that transition into external rotation and then through ball release. So we're seeing some, whole bunch of different things that, it takes time, but I want to give you a few things that we can, provide for you. So real basic shoulder anatomy, like, we don't have a microscope. We can't image, we can't do an MRI every time we throw, but we have to understand the structure of the scap and the shoulder joint and shoulder complex. So we'll talk a little bit about like dynamic and static cuff stability. So if you have your band exercises, let's just say you're doing reverse flies or, shoulder external, internal, any type of diagonal pattern, abduction work, those are your standard kind of static movements. Your dynamic movements would be more of your rhythmic stabilizations, your timing component, which we'll talk a little bit about there. And they're in this presentation. They're both critical. We need to establish a baseline strength, but then we need to progress into more of a dynamic component, learning how to control the humeral head through external rotation and through ball release. So L drill movements, I know for some of our youth athletes or middle school coaches and some of our high school coaches are still teaching L drills for baseball and softball athletes. And for me, it was kind of a hey, like there's probably a better way to train these types of arm actions versus your standard old school movement. So when you're doing an L drill, like you don't get any scapular movement and it's not really tied into hip or torso separation or involvement. So when you're doing this movement, you're just basically doing like a lateral deltoid raise. So you don't actually create pattern work or timing between the rest of the body. So this is one exercise that we've done quite a bit with some of our arm pathway exercises, getting away from just static setups. So this is just a band that we have attached to kind of a low anchor post. I don't know if you guys can see that. And he's kind of moving through an arm action. We call this a scapular upward rotation movement. And the band is providing a little bit of resistance and a little bit of tension so that the athlete can feel his torso rotating and then his arm coming through the throwing zone. So I don't know if you guys having trouble seeing that or no? Or is it moving pretty fluid?
It's a little choppy, but I mean, I think
Choppy,
we get
okay.
the idea for sure.
Perfect. Okay.
It's just the nature of Zoom. So yeah, it's fine. These videos will work.
No doubt. Cool. So this is something that we provide as a, pre-throwing movement, 5, 8, 10 reps. It's nothing that's going to create a lot of volume for. So something that you can do at home, which is really effective. This gives you a little, see if it plays here. This is one of our athletes a couple years ago, Zach Rafferty. He threw 90. But you can see how his arm really, so there's some scapular movement there. What you don't see is how his hips are also kind of working in conjunction with the arm. So you'll see the arm load back and then start to transition into, which will come into external rotation. So just to kind of give you an understanding of that type of pattern. So elbow complex, lots of structures that blend into a very small area. So that's why one of the exercises that we're going to talk about in here has been really effective for our athletes as a pre-throwing routine, even throwing days. So again, you can see there's tons of structures that insert into a very small area. And these muscles are critical for dispersing energy and forces and, through ball release as well. So here's Zach again, just more of a transition from a vertical forearm into shoulder external rotation. And you can start to see a lot of the forearm musculature starts to activate. And then the forearm will start to unravel through ball release. So again, just to give you a visual of that transition, and we're trying to prepare the tissue and the body for the demands of throwing in all of our prep work drills. Here's one of our softball players, just so you can kind of see the finish and how the forearm unravels through ball release and kind of that shoulder blade. If you think of retraction, protraction movements, we'll get back to that in a second. So the arm works into external rotation, the forearm, I call it unraveling, and then that shoulder blade is going to kind of kind of protract along the rib cage to allow for proper follow through. So again, baseball, softball athletes, these are movements. This is not like poor throwing patterns attack female athletes or male athletes. It's like a movement pattern. So anything that is provided with baseball could very much well be provided for softball athletes. So some practical application. We've been doing a lot of flex bar training, twists, eccentric movements, kind of pronation movements with the flex bar. And I learned about it through Tim Tyler, a PT in New York, and he started to provide his patients with, eccentric movements to combat tendinopathies and lateral medial condylitis for tennis players, little league elbow, and started to see a ton of really good results with pain management for lots of athletes. And it was featured in one of the journals after the study was completed to show that this type of training is a lot more effective than kind of your standard like flexion, extension, pronation, supination, ulnar radial deviation movement. So we started to add in different types of flex bar movements. And I'm not sure how much they're going to play from the choppiness of the platform, but there's a couple different variations. There's one where we basically extend the arms out and then eccentric, concentric movements with the wrist on both sides. There's one where we do kind of a cross grip where we're just kind of prepping the forearm and the elbow for pronation, and we kind of simulate through ball release. There's another movement where we have more of an elbow extension move where we're extending the right arm or throwing arm out as we're bringing it back. And you can kind of see on that bottom left-hand video, that's Nick doing one of those kind of reverse curl movements. So we've been adding these in 1 to 2 sets of 8 to 10. If you don't have a flex bar, you can use just a rolled up towel. We found some really good results. Athletes, really not complaining of really any issues from doing it pre-throwing. We've added some post-throwing work with this exercise as well, but it's been pretty standard in all of our throwing programs. Here's a SCAP roll movement that we want athletes to feel blended movements. So if you look at this athlete, if it starts to play again, but you can see there's trunk rotation, there's the arm moving back, so the scapular movement's occurring as the throw or the lead arm is working out. So let's see if I can get one again here, see if it plays through smooth. So we're trying to learn blended movements of trunk rotation paired with scapular movement and the glove side working away. So we're creating these tension points throughout the athlete's body. And again, it could be staggered stance, it could be feet even, it could be kneeling, it could be kind of any variational stance you want. Another really cool pattern drill that we do is a bent elbow raise, which just kind of allows the athlete to feel how the shoulder blade kind of works along the rib cage and how we pattern that drill or that movement into a loaded throw. So again, this video is going a little choppy, but there's some movements where we're just keeping this angle less than 90. We're doing this bent elbow raise movement just to feel scapular movement along the rib cage. And then as we get to the top point, we'll start to rotate the body and kind of work those blended patterns. So we'll have an arm up movement, might do 2 or 3 of them, and then transition into kind of a loaded movement, just to give these athletes a little bit of a feel of how to pair these kind of components together. And the kind of the last piece I just wanted to talk about is this bent elbow raise or arm behind setup that we use with all of our athletes. And the first time I implemented this, I think it was 2009 or 10. And the parents were like, what is this kid doing? Like, that's not how you throw. And the whole purpose of the arm behind setup is to feel how your shoulder blade moves on your rib cage, but also to minimize the angle between the humerus and the forearm, because so many athletes were getting very extended. And then the L drill setup, kids were starting at 90 and then pushing out, and just kind of really weird sequencing happening. So we started this kind of arm behind setup. You can do a stagger stance, double kneeling, pivot throw. There's lots of different uses for this pattern or for this setup. But again, the whole goal was to explore this angle and then how your shoulder blade kind of moves along the rib cage. So this exercise we've done probably since 2009, 2010, and people are like, what are you doing? That's weird. But there's a lot of good things that can happen from it. You can create dissociation between your torso and your hips. You can create scapular movement. You can create timing between your glove side and your throwing arm. You can allow the torso to carry the arm through external rotation. There's a lot of good qualities with these types of arm behind setups that are critical for, I feel, infielders, outfielders, catchers, not just pitchers. So again, something that we've used in our throwing progressions. Half kneeling, we've done a half kneeling where the throwing leg side is up. So you're feeling that tension. I actually saw probably 8 or 10 years ago, I saw a strength coach doing a staggered stance dumbbell row just to kind of keep the pelvis in place so that they can feel some trunk movement. And I kind of forgot about it and then thought about it again. That's, I think, how these staggered stance drills started to come, to feel those tension points between the pelvis and the torso. So just kind of going back through a whole kind of practical application piece, and maybe you guys save this, print it out, could be a pretty decent piece of warm up for you. We have it broken down into just 3 different areas. We have a prep work and activation, which might be your T-spine movement, some type of dissociation, we call it supine twist, adductor rockers, and a shoulder movement, 3-point contact Y, which is basically like a prone trap raise, but we won't have 20 PT tables. So you basically create your own platform by a 3-point stance. So that's kind of our prep work. Lots of variations to that. Our arm care, series 1, we might have some, even though it's arm care, hip internal, external rotation, movement, understanding how that pattern occurs, sideline external rotation, so some cuff work, and then our flex bar and any type of rhythmic stabilization, whether it's partner rhythmic, body blade, or shoulder tube, or shoulder sphere, kind of whatever you have access to. And then the last one, last series, these are more of our patterning exercise. So your band patterning drill, water bottle drill, which is basically you're filling up a water bottle halfway and you're going through the pattern and the movement, feeling the water, hearing the water shift at certain times in your throw. And it's, that's a really powerful exercise for athletes coming off of surgery or off of an injury, or just to be at home and help pattern their arm. If a coach has told them, hey, your arm's too long, it's getting away from your body, those types of things can help it. And then your arm behind setup drills. And again, these are all variations, double kneeling, seated arm behind, staggered pivot, kind of our go-to staple in our programming. So just to give you some things to take home with you, I'm a huge fan of the flex bar. I'm a big fan of the band upward rotation movement. And again, with that exercise, we don't actually release the forearm. We just kind of pause in external rotation just to feel how the torso carries the arm forward. So I think I offered everybody a 25% discount on the book, HLT 25 if you don't have it. If you have the book, send me an email and I'll give you a discount on something else. I also have some products available, the flex bar, the lightning balls, the training balls, and then the lightning bands, if anyone is interested as well. I know that, they're stuck at home and trying to figure out different things to do. So, and then, follow me and put out some good information on social media platforms. So again, I hope that helped a little bit of an insight into high level throwing and some patterning and prep pieces.
Really quick, Austin, can you go back to the HLT 25? I'm just going to snap a picture of it so I can put it in the Slack forum later.
Yep.
Perfect. I'll make sure I get a link I'll find that link to your website and all that stuff too. So we had some questions that are popping up in the chat if you've got a couple extra minutes. the first question, and I think you covered it, was what is a flex bar? You kind of showed videos and things like that. Tanner, if that didn't quite answer your question, let's come back to it. Another question was, it's more of a pitching question, and it has to do with age of throwing a curveball.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, all of the things that I've read and in my experience, athletes at a young age have a very difficult time of finding the same release point. So kind of hammering fastballs, change up too. Like you want the body to rotate efficiently. You want to teach them to move as clean as possible without trying to manipulate things at an early age. But I mean, we teach change ups, probably the first thing we'll teach, and then curveballs. We'll start with like kneeling and kind of feeling the grip and throwing light movements into a bucket, like at the plate. We'll do some tennis ball, curveball stuff just to kind of feel these different movements. And these are all at low efforts. So it could be, it depends. You have a 13-year-old kid that's super mature that, has been throwing curveballs since he's 7 years old, his dad. And he comes to you and there's no injury history there. Everything looks clean, or you have a kid that, is 11 or 13 and can't stand on his own 2 feet and he wants to throw a curveball and a splitter and all these, different things. But, I think it depends. I mean, it depends. It depends on their movement. If they don't have a clean movement, they can't do a bodyweight lunge, probably should be focusing more on like the stability, strength, and the body preparation than manipulating pitches. So that's a tough one. I mean, we've had kids that curveballs at 13. We have kids that throw curveballs at 11. We had kids that are 15, 16. It really, you got to take into account the entire picture.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember, so many people have come on and none of this has been, and I want to reiterate this, like none of this has been staged. Like there's no general message we're trying to send. Like we're trying to gather really smart people to share information. And one really common theme has been get the body right. And so I think especially kids want to jump into skill work way too soon without like the threshold, trying to drive a car without any brakes or with poor steering. When in reality, like you got to build up like the body first. And a lot of the skill work you're trying to accomplish you're going to nail that out. Like it's going to happen because your body is actually capable of doing it. And humans were good at accomplishing tasks for the most part.
Sure. I mean, think about, an infielder going to the backhand side to come and throw. Like if they can't do a lunge and hold that lunge and an ISO movement for 3 seconds, like the body's going to be kind of, at a place to make that throw. So, you need the body right to set up your throw and your arm based on, hundreds of thousands of different variations of throws that you're going to be making in different, parts of the field. So, movement is critical. I think that's important. And, kids jump into skill really fast.
Awesome. Coach Tucker, thanks for being on today. Really appreciate it. She just wants to say thanks. Love your material.
What's up, Kama?
And go from there. And then I got another question. Do you ever talk about the glove arm and how that ties or cues into the arm action?
I actually don't really talk about glove side until I feel like it's an issue. The glove side is helping to create. I thought I had sorry, I'm just kind of cruising through here. I think the glove side arm is going to be dictated by what the ball tells you to do. So as a pitcher, like there's lots of different variations. Again, it could extend out. It could stay closer to the body. We've seen athletes have success with both. I had one athlete that was 95, 96 that barely like extended his elbow. So it's kind of based on what they present in their evaluation. From a position player, like if you're a second baseman turning a double play, like your glove side is going to clear or fold or peel along your rib cage in order for your body to rotate and accelerate. As an outfielder, it might extend up before it kind of rips in towards the rib cage or towards the hip area. But the whole focus of glove side is to assist with trunk rotation and to create good direction towards your target. But so I don't really talk about it unless I have to talk about it. I think there's just so many variations based on what the ball is telling you to do, then what that lead arm is going to kind of follow. So if you do a backhand infielder, it's different than a fly ball throwing a runner out at home from center field. So glove side is going to be dictated by what the ball tells you to do.
awesome. Nicole, did that answer your question? If not, go ahead and just unmute yourself and jump in here.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm talking about more of outfield wise.
Mhm.
I guess some more supinated versus a internal rotation move.
So like thumb down versus thumb up.
Yeah, like when they
Yeah.
go and they're going into external. Sometimes I feel like they'll put their glove out here instead of here, and then it'll help them get through better.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, sometimes and again, if you're talking that kind of patterning, if the thumb is down, for the most part, athletes have a better time of keeping their shoulder, their front, side closed a little bit. Again, and I hate like comparing like pitchers that also play a position, but sometimes when you have a pitcher that's so used to this, you'll see their glove side, like their supinate as they low back, because that's such a comfortable pattern for them. So in softball, I see that way more than I do in baseball athletes. I see like that pattern in softball, and I see more like thumb down or fingertips out in baseball. So yeah, no, you're 100%. I see that supination, and it could potentially have some early trunk rotation, I guess.
Do you feel like it promotes early thoracic extension too sometimes?
As well, yeah, and I think the pitching portion of it as well forces like ridiculous amounts of like lumbar extension and versus rotation and things like that. So I think there's again a correlation. Like you see this, then you see forced lumbar and thoracic extension through ball release.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Does anybody else have any other questions? All right, cool. I have one to kind of end us on really quick. I want to talk about overuse versus underdeveloped. It's kind of a interesting topic, maybe kind of broad, but I think the word overuse gets thrown around a lot, and I kind of wanted to hear your take on what the threshold is between overuse and underdeveloped, or how you would explain that.
I'm sorry, say that again.
So what would the threshold be to determine whether a player's been overused or underdeveloped?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like baseball and softball is such a complex sport to program for, because there's just so much volume throughout the year. Again, in my experience, I feel like youth athletes, high school athletes, middle school athletes are pretty underdeveloped in terms of like body movements and strength and awareness. But their volume of play is so high. So there's like a really weird balance there. So like, their skill might be really decent, but their body structure or strength numbers are so far below than what they should be. And maybe they're just getting away with it now because, as they're getting older, that volume starts to increase. So it's definitely a challenge from a throwing standpoint as well. I think I'm a big proponent of throwing daily, whether it's changing the intensity, arm mapping drills, long toss protocols, weighted implements if required, if the athlete presents that. So I think there's, I think it's a challenge. We don't have like, one event every year or every 4 years. We play all the time. So it's navigating through the weekly practices or the midweek games or the weekend tournaments or weekend doubleheaders or whatever that might be. So I think it's, the programming has to be day to day. It has to be based on how they feel when they come in.
Awesome. And then I do have one more question. Catchers who may move to a different position at some point in their career. You hear a lot that, they throw like a catcher. You mentioned it earlier, the body can have multiple arm slots based on what's, being asked of them to do. What's something catchers can prepare to do, or what's kind of the simplest thing? And it may be a simple answer. I just want to get your take on it. Yeah.
I mean, with our catchers, we want to try and do a couple different arm actions or release points. So if they're going to be an outfielder as well, that's a tricky one because you have a short pathway versus more of an extended pathway. But that doesn't mean a catcher can't go to the outfield and have a complete hose with a shorter pathway. So again, I think catchers, like if that's your primary position, you need to be working on your pathway. If you're going to play an infield position, a third or short or second, like that stuff will be fine for you. Those patterns will transfer. But if you have that outfield to catcher kind of transition, that might be the trickiest one, especially if you have a coach that is like, oh, you have to get your arm very long. And the catcher's like, well, I throw like 92 from the outfield from here, like, and my body works well, no injury history, I'm on the money. Like, why do I need to extend my arm down? So, I think you can have both pathways as long as your body works well. And the coaches be like, okay, they present more of a shorter pathway, or this athlete presents more of a longer pathway, and both of them are fine. They're okay.
Awesome. That's all I got. If nobody else has anything else, we'll move on. So going once.
All right.
Going twice. All right. Awesome. Thanks for your time, man. I really appreciate it. I'll shoot that link in the Slack, and so people know kind of where to find your book and those training tools.
Awesome, man. I appreciate it. Thanks, Ryan, for having me on.
Absolutely. Thanks, man.
All right.
Sean, we'll shift gears to you. I know you're going to kind of possibly address some of the anatomical stuff as well, and kind of what you got going on. I know you're a college coach right now, so if you kind of want to introduce yourself, better than I can, we'll kind of shift gears to what you got for us.
Appreciate it, Ryan. Thanks for having me on, man. I hope everybody's healthy and happy, first and foremost. I currently am a pitching coach, recruiting coordinator, assistant strength coach at an NAIA school located in the Southeast region in Jacksonville, Florida, working primarily with collegiate athletes right now. Obviously, everybody's out of school due to the situation, but I work with a lot of youth athletes here as well. I own a fitness company. And then during the summers, I'm usually on the summer collegiate circuit. Last 2 summers I have been, and I was scheduled to go to the Cape this summer as more of a player development, head strength coach type position. With that being said, it kind of leaves me, I wouldn't be where I'm at today if it weren't for Rye and kind of what he's built up there in Illinois. So he's doing a great job, and he's a great source of information. With that being said, just kind of taking a step forward and talking a little bit about everybody's current situation, being at home, being an athlete, the difficult, challenging times, and having to continue to mediate, and modify your workouts as the days come. I think the biggest thing right now and the biggest contingency is developing a plan, creating programming. If you're a dad, or if you're a family, you don't have access to create programming that is going to be complete and isn't necessarily going to have a needs analysis. I think that probably is going to play a big role into the success of your athlete. So have a plan of attack, quality over quantity. I know you made a comment earlier, Ryan, about overuse versus underdeveloped. More of a overuse versus fatigue. Body language is going to play a really big role in that, and just monitoring your athlete rep to rep, set to set. But having, and just kind of bouncing around, just talking a little bit about strength and mobility. I know there's the 2 topics you wanted me to touch on. So obviously just exerting force, and then just being able to move freely about the joint. And there's different types of joints. There's different types of strength. So if you're looking to build endurance strength, then obviously your rep scheme is going to be a little bit higher. If you're looking to build a little more strength, some more basic strength, which I firmly believe a lot of youth athletes and a lot of right now should be focused, moving well, moving better, focusing on 3 to 5, 5 to 7 rep schemes right now. As long as there was an on-ramp process leading up to kind of where that athlete's at now. But day to day is going to be a little bit different, and there's always going to be challenges that arise. One of them being equipment, and access to a facility. You have got to be creative. You've got to be creative. I think that's the biggest thing that kind of stands in the way. So resistance is an issue, or limited access to resistance. But I've got obviously something I'm kind of big at, obviously here at home, is just make sure you've got your resistance bands to have access for your athletes. And then I'm big on sandbags. If you have access to sandbags, that's another big component that's going to help move a little bit of resistance, and you can incorporate some more movements from an RDL into an Olympic style movement, and you can get creative. So with that being said, kind of leads me into the RDL. And that's a movement I think that is extremely fundamental, but it's extremely complex. And it's one that a lot of athletes have a tendency to screw up. So, with that being said, it's, ground-based movements, building a little bit of strength, basic strength from the ground up is going to help that athlete and position that athlete in a successful, if you start in a successful position. I've seen it obviously done the other way around. So you want to keep all that in perspective and just, like I said, moving better. So flexibility, stability, coordination, movement, you want to get just about protraction, retraction, just getting some ground-based movements, getting these kids really feeling force into the ground. I think is going to help them understand where they need to be. And then you can talk about what style learner your athlete is. And I mean, all this is taken into consideration because a youth athlete isn't going to, maybe he's more of a visual athlete, or maybe he's more of a proprioceptive, a kinesthetic learner. So you have to take all that into consideration as well. So right now it is a great time to dial back and decrease the intensity and increase the volume. Make sure we get the movement patterns, master the movement patterns, feel comfortable in the movement patterns, unlock a lot of doors as far as immobility goes, and really take care of your athlete, build them up really well, tailor to their weaknesses. And then obviously it goes all the way back to simulating movements that'll translate to the game. So whether they're an outfielder, a pitcher, a catcher, you see a lot of catchers experience a lot of obviously day-to-day valgus. I mean, they're going to experience that just simply because of the positional demands. And so that's something you have to take into consideration, is continuing to strengthen and recondition those knee joints. You got to think about all this time off, and then all of a sudden they're popping behind the plate, and they could be, if everything goes back to the way it was, I mean, you never know, this fall they could be squatting another 10,000 times. I mean, to try to get back into shape. And so you don't want that to be the reason why, is because they fell behind. But with that being said, don't be afraid to increase the volume. You can go north of 7, go 10, go 12, make sure they move well. And if they're confidently moving in a position, then you can, better lack of words, you can kind of take advantage of that and allow them to create some muscular endurance, allow and promote that. I don't think there's a bigger takeaway than just overall athletic development and tailoring to the weaknesses, but don't forget to tailor to the strengths. I've been on plenty of conference calls, and we've discussed, kind of where your athlete is and how do we hammer home the things that he doesn't do well. Let's hammer home the things he does well, and let's build off that. Let's build some confidence off the things that he does really well, whether it is the squat, whether it is the RDL, whether it is, and then obviously incorporate different variations. We talked about bilateral, unilateral earlier. Austin did. Big fan of the lateral lunge. There's a 3-in-1 that you can incorporate: a forward lunge, a lateral lunge, and a reverse lunge, and then add a different variation of an overhead movement in there. And so whether you're doing that through your assessment of whether you're doing that through your assessment process, or whether you're incorporating that into their dynamic warm up, you can still get really creative with that.
Sean, can you show us what that looks like? The three options there.
Yeah, I'm gonna turn this sideways, and then you can let me know if you see me.
Maybe down just a little bit to see your feet.
Yeah. Should be able to see me now. So in this position right here, I'm gonna go lunge straight ahead, dive back, okay, drive back. And then I'm gonna go lateral lunge, and you can incorporate an overhead variation. And then drive up, and then we can go, same thing, we can go back and do a reverse lunge. and back up. So a lot of unilateral movements that incorporate some overhead variations are going to help your athlete be a little more, it's a little more of a foundational movement in the sense that it just gets them overhead and puts them in a position. And you can, and once again, I challenge you to incorporate that on all three aspects of the lunge. You know, but I mean, as far as mobility goes, when they're on those bands, I mean, that's going to be a huge piece. Get them into, you know, a plank position or a push-up position. You know, with elbows extended, we can get into a little bit of scapular protraction and retraction and some mobilization there. So that's some really good stuff to do too. You really do not need a ton of resistance right now to get better. There's so many angles I can take with that, just simply because we talk about sprint form, sprint work. You know, if you've got sprint hurdles, if you've got access to sand, you can do sand sprints. So, you know, and then you talk about back into the quadruped position, which is when I'm on all fours on my back, or I'm sorry, I'm on all fours on the ground. I'm on my knees and I'm on my hands. The hands are screwed into the ground. We can do a hip circuit. So you can incorporate a lot of movements from that position, and then you can get creative from there. But, you know, as far as that goes with the mobility aspect, I think a lot of it's going to be predetermined with your soft tissue. You know, so if you have access to a foam roller, if you don't, and you have access to a bar, then you can still do some soft tissue. There's going to be a little bit of discomfort there. You know, but for the workload, it's you've got to incorporate that into your recovery. You know, but with that being said, it's completely up to you. I would definitely incorporate more prone positions. You know, where we're tiers. We want to make sure that we focus on. You talk about the kicking system and earlier. I mean, that's a great leadway into, you know, into the shoulder girdle, and just make sure we as far as internal, external overhead movements. Like I said, I would definitely continue to train the decelerators on the back side of the shoulder. That's going to really, you know, some mileage to the shoulder. I think right now, with it being such a strange time for a lot of these overhead throwers, you got to remember how much time these athletes spend up overhead. They don't spend more than 2 to 3 hours up overhead, if that, and that's on a game day. Even potentially on a throwing day, there's just not a lot of volume up overhead outside of the overhead throw. Now in the strength and conditioning setting, obviously we want to train that shoulder. We want to continue to endurance that shoulder, that musculature, and to make sure that we train the meat and the potatoes, but we obviously train the cuff as well, the rotator cuff as well. So strength training at home is gonna kind of be a game changer for a lot of folks as we re-enter the fall with, you know, with the situation that we're in right now. It's going to increase muscular strength, basic strength, like I spoke about before, increase bone density, burn calories, and boost mood. I mean, that's kind of it. You want to keep a good head on your athlete's shoulder, continue to promote positivity, you know, give them ideas, you know, whether they're single leg movements, body weight movements, bilateral movements, get creative, get them on their hands and knees, do some scap retraction, protraction. You can do some eyes, Ys, and Ts from that position as well. Incorporate some hip mobility in that position, and then a hip circuit like we spoke about earlier. And you can still get explosive from a body weight squat movement. You can still get extremely creative, obviously, with jump squats, with a jump squat into a sprint. And then you can incorporate more hurdle work during your sprint work, incorporating the body weight squat, into that sprint with the hurdles. So you're still creating maximum force through the ground, giving your athlete a chance to exert full force, max force. So get creative with the rep schemes, know your athletes, understand what you're trying to accomplish, set a goal. Don't just train. Don't just train to train. Train, whether it's position specific or under the age of 12, athletic development. Stick to continuing to promote good movement patterns, positive shin angles, and then train that spine, train the positioning. I think that's going to play really key as they continue to develop.
Sean, really quick, you talked a lot about good movements and shin angles and body positioning, things like that. You demonstrated that those good lunges. Can you give us maybe some keys, kind of things to think about if players are looking at their form in the mirror? Can you maybe demonstrate like 3 or 4, or I guess let's stick to two or three really good moves that you want to perfect in your athletes? So no resistance, something they just can do in the mirror that they can kind of focus on with maybe a couple cues for each one.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to start with the meat and the potatoes. So I'm going to start with an RDL. So this is a sandbag. This is what one looks like with handles on it. So you can get one from any performance training facility or anything like that where they actually sell some of this equipment. And so all I want to do, I want to make sure you guys can see me. So in an RDL setup, all I'm looking for is toes. Toes are my hips are going to be externally rotated, and I want to make sure my hips. I want to screw my heels into the ground. From that position right there, I want to set the shoulders, and then all I'm looking to do is take the sandbag down towards my shins, and make sure I keep make sure you maintain that vertical spine. That would be definitely one of my primary movements. And then I would also incorporate an overhead body weight squat. So
and just to be clear too, on this one, if they don't have a band, can they use maybe a broomstick or something at home?
Absolutely. And PVC pipe. PVC pipe will play. Hands in line with the elbows in line with the shoulders. Just make sure, like we talk about, coordination as well. So just keep everything in line. Screw the heels into the ground. Stand up nice and tall. Keep the spine in line, and just make sure it's a slow and controlled. If you want to incorporate tempo, if you want to incorporate some tempo into the squats too, you can do that too. Like 3 seconds down, 3 seconds up. So you can get really creative there. So bands up overhead. I don't want to run my hands into my fan. So from this position right here, down and back up. Okay, and then make sure you promote activation at the end of the movement. So I want to activate my glutes. I want to turn my glutes on, make sure they fire. The movement's pointless if we're not activating the right musculature.
If we have maybe an athlete who can't get all the way down due to some kind of upper back restriction, shoulder restriction, or ankle restriction, how far do you want them to go, and what are kind of some things you want them to pay attention to in the mirror to make sure that they don't misuse the exercise or not, or just so they can get the most out of it, even though they do have some restrictions? Absolutely,
yeah. So if you can't get him down to 90 degrees, and which is completely understandable, a lot of youth athletes don't have the capability to, or they're super lax and they can, then just take it, and we're just going to set into a front squat position right here. Keep the elbows high, and then still sit into the deep squat. That way we don't drive that way we're not driving the throwing shoulder and external rotation. And so once again, it's more body positioning than it is anything. So just get into a front squat, and you can just bend the bands here. And then from this position right here, sit back and drive to the sky. And then we're just activating from that position right there. So that would be one way. It's too much if it's too difficult. The lunge circuit, I think is gonna, and once again, every single lunge you can go up overhead with the hands. So you're still training the shoulder girdle, and if you feel an impingement or if you feel some discomfort, then you can still shut that down.
Awesome.
Train the lower half with the belly button from the belly button down.
Yeah, and I think if you can't get a sandbag or you don't have access to something like that, maybe a long duffel bag with get
Yes.
creative with what you put in there. Half gallons of jugs of water, stuff that swishes around. Doesn't necessarily have to be a sandbag on that side of things. So, Sean, that was awesome. Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions for him? I know that was a lot. Going once, going twice. Sean, thanks for showing us those movements and reminding us how athletic you still are on that side of things. My demonstration game is gone way down in the past 2 years.
You're welcome, but I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. And were you still planning on doing a maybe 2 or 3 minute kind of devotional as well? Do we wrap that up, or do we not have that on the schedule? I know originally we talked about it. If not, it's totally okay.
Yeah, I didn't have it on the schedule.
Okay. What's maybe your favorite kind of thing that you're thinking about right now? Because I know you're into the Word. I know you're always kind of thinking about that stuff. I don't mean to put you on the spot. Just something 2 or 3 minutes that you're kind of maybe reminding your guys about, or that you remind yourself about if you're willing to talk about it. And I apologize for putting you on the spot. I know you're more open to that than some people. So I'm abusing our relationship a little bit.
There's a lot of disparity in the world, and I continue to remind my guys just how beautiful of an opportunity it is to step outside of your comfort zone and put your hand on someone's shoulder and just remind them you love them, and just take care of your athletes, promote positivity, in such an uncomfortable situation and such an uncomfortable world. He continues to stand by our side and remind us why he's the greatest God, and why, we continue to be provided opportunities where, I mean, without Zoom, there's no way I'd be able to speak on behalf of, coaches, and just, the facility, and just continue to breathe life into, other coaches, breathe life into athletes, be on tons of conference calls about just how great, our career, our industry is. We are so lucky to have not only a great industry, but just a great giving God, and just and be surrounded by so many good people. And so my message to my guys was, feel comfortable being as uncomfortable as possible, because right now is an extremely uncomfortable time. And step outside your comfort zone, put your indifferences, to the side, and focus on being great for somebody else today.
It's awesome, man. I think one thing that I read today, kind of that goes, you mentioned like put your hand on someone you love shoulder. It just was talking about in your household, and just for me, it's my wife, and then my kids, and there's 5 of us, and obviously very different experiences that we're all going through. And not to compare. And I think from a baseball perspective, when some of your teammates maybe can go to a field, or maybe can do something, or maybe they live in a different part of the country that can do different things, or can't do different things because they're so far north versus being in the south. Not to compare your situation to anybody else's. Like, we're all kind of going through struggles, and it's not good it's not healthy to be like, feel sorry for yourself because somebody else can't do it. And Kris kind of talks about at the beginning, control your controllables. It's something that's been, Tiger Peterson talked about it. Rob Seifert talked about it. Tom Borowski talked about it. I mean, it's just one of those things that's it's control your controllables. And I think that's more prevalent now. And one of the things we control is our kindness and our intention to, be kind to others. And like you said, kind of make sure people around us are doing all right.
Yeah, the one thing that is difficult I think to deal with right now is seeing all the pictures on the other athletes altered just a little bit is a difficult thing to deal with. But just know that at one point in time, things are never gonna maybe be the way that they once were, but they're still gonna be we're still gonna be back on the field together.
Absolutely. All right, man. Hey, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. If anybody wants to hang out, I've got sometimes we'll do kind of a little breakout at the end. We've been going for about an hour, 20 minutes now, so I can hang out for about 5 minutes. If you guys are good, go ahead and jump off, and no one else wants to come on, then we'll just end this thing. So thanks, Sean.
Hey, thanks for your time, guys.